morning, Elise. Tom, you're
Hi.
looking picture perfect. Elise, you're looking picture perfect.
Morning to you too, Lisa. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
How's your week so far? I know we're at the end of it.
Well, it's been another crazy busy week.
Mhm.
I just find this being working from home is actually giving me a little more work because I have to focus in on it rather than being on a location.
Right.
Now, one of the things that you should know when we talk about how's my week, I did clear out my desk and put it in boxes. But the longest project now is to sort through the boxes and say, this is for Risa, this is for the file 13, this is for me. I mean, I've come across a lot of material. So,
Yeah, I know. What is it? 33 years of Masterworks material.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So
I've got more in the basement for you, plus my own 32 years of material.
I was going to say, it's going to take 33 years to just clear everything out. So
Yeah,
got a long road ahead.
yeah, that's right.
All right, so today we are talking about a really big topic. It's the thought around how Bermuda tourism really started to boom in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and how that impacted the local art scene here in Bermuda. So probably too big of a topic to cover every single detail in this one episode, but I think it's a good way for us to open the door for further conversations around specific artists that visited Bermuda during that time and have since visited Bermuda to paint, to get creative energy from Bermuda's landscape, from its people. And we just thought that this would be a topic that would be quite timely, given the fact that we are in the midst of summer right now. Our tourism
And we have no tourists. Yeah, that's right.
we have no tourists. So let's talk about tourists because we don't have them in front of us.
Let's fill that void.
Yeah, exactly. So just to kick off, I mean, I know that there's a lot here to cover, as I said before, but is there any specific theme that you would like to start with in relation to Bermuda tourism, how it started, and how that impacted, these individuals from overseas who were seen as leading within the art space at that time, visiting Bermuda, and what they did while they were here?
Well, I think it's one of these things that is, you got to look at its roots and its the derivations and the branches, from it. Because in 1883, Princess Louise visits Bermuda, and she goes back to Canada, where she and her husband were stationed in Ottawa. While she was here, she painted, and she wrote beautiful passages about this island, and that helped promote the idea of maybe we have a trade development board. And so in 1885, we open up the idea of tourism in Bermuda on a full-blown basis, not just on an ad hoc system. And in 1885, the Quebec Steamship Company, stationed in New York, opened the shores up with a boat called the SS Trinidad, which had a regular visit to Bermuda back and forth, bringing people like Winslow Homer to our island, and bringing Mark Twain at least once to our island. And so, there were other boats, that were doing it, but the SS Trinidad probably was made famous in the hands of Winslow Homer when he painted it in 1901. I think, however, to come back a little bit, when we started out, in the idea of Masterworks, we said, okay, there's the big three. There's Winslow Homer, Andrew Wyeth, Georgia O'Keeffe. So you dig your in the shovel into the soil and say, who else is come here? So we're always looking in our own way. We're looking for our connective tissue. And one of the 12 works that we bought in 1987 actually was painted by Ross Turner in 1885, the year that tourism opened up. So we've got immediately some connection to our heritage. Remember that prior to 1885, Bermuda was considered an isle of devils, made up of pirates and plunderers and seafarers and farmers, and an unsavory lot, with a knife between their teeth, that sort of thing, and a patch around their eye, and a scarf around their head, that whole sort of scene. So we became sort of more gentrified. Now, I have a theory that Winslow Homer, because he was deified in his time, was one of those people that really helped branch the artists to come to Bermuda, because his work was exhibited at the Buffalo Exposition of 1901. And on his second visit to Bermuda in that year, the floodgates after that opened. I would also like to say, because I was just working with Elise on a couple of things on photography, George Eastman invented the box camera which made photography popular in 1888. This is quite serendipitous. So 1888 is 3 years only after tourism opens up. And in 1889, 1 year after its invention, we have a complete set of a visitor's time here in Bermuda in the format of a box camera. It is stunning. It is absolutely stunning to see that. I mean, a year after its invention, we would stumble upon a collection like that. And as far as I know, I think it's unique. Each box, by the way, just for the audience out there, each box had 100 exposures. And then you would send it off to the processor, and back would come your print. So you didn't know what you were taking or what you had. And so whoever the photographer was had some idea of their exposures. It's pretty cool.
And the other interesting thing about the box photography was that when Winslow Homer came to Bermuda, he had gotten one of these cameras very early on too, as an artist and as a photographer. And we know that he did a number of prints. We know that he did prints of Bermuda with this box camera. We don't know where they are, because we found out that he brought them back, and his house was open in Prouts Neck, Maine. And tourists were actually taking them as souvenirs. We've seen some that he did in Cuba. We've seen some that he's did in the Florida Everglades. But he obviously used these as well as a memento of his trip. So that was pretty phenomenal. And as Tom said, by 1902, people had gone to the Buffalo Exposition. The Buffalo Exposition in those days was a showcase for American invention, and they had all kinds of pavilions. They had a technology pavilion, they had a science pavilion, and they had an art pavilion. And it was here that Homer put his Bermuda works and said they're the best. These are the best works I've ever done. And we know that a lot of the East Coast artists traveled there because they wanted to see what was new, what was happening, what was innovative in art. And they were struck by these. And obviously this led them to come to Bermuda. Now, the problem was that right after that, the war broke out. Well, not right after that, but within 10 years, war had broken out in Europe, and Bermuda was once again isolated, and there was no tourism. It was surrounded by U-boats. It was surrounded by landmines. It was overrun by soldiers. So it wasn't a very lugubrious place to come to paint, except for people like Hartley and Demuth, who did come down here during the war because it was cheap and they could get around, and stayed at places like Brunswick Street Guest House and the St. George's Hotel and places like that, which were inexpensive, and that attracted artists because and it was also exotic. It was better than going to Florida. So there are a lot of things that drew artists over, in those early days. But I would say, and I'm sure Tom will agree with me, but by 1920, Bermuda was really established as an artistic oasis. I mean, people like Ambrose Webster came here first in 1912. And it was here he discovered that, as he said, that the shadows in Bermuda were purple. And that was a great, with his Fauvus painting and with the kind of work he was doing, it was a great eye opener for him. But
within a couple of years, Bermuda was the envy of many a location as a tourist destination. And so we were copied and or emulated in many jurisdictions. The thousands and thousands and thousands of postcards that are proof positive of people coming here and writing to loved ones. They just turn up hundreds. I mean, it's staggering how much business was created through this industry. China plates, Bermuda bags, Bermuda shorts, Bermuda this, Bermuda that, all of it related to the idea of tourism. I have these charm bracelets on from the 40s and 50s as an example of the kinds of things that surface and that continue to be part of the Masterworks collection to help tell that story. And I share with you, Risa, that we have two images that I'm very proud of that are not Bermuda subject matter, but they tell the story. One is the SS Trinidad at dock in New York, and you see the warehouse that says Bermuda West Indies, Quebec Steamship Company. That's one. And so in that image, you can imagine Winslow Homer walking down the pier with his papers and his pigments and his brushes in hand, particularly on his second trip, so excited about a revisit to Bermuda. And the other image that we have is an image from the Buffalo Exposition of 1901, because when I retire, I will sit back and go back to school, go to university, and do my PhD thesis. I'll just jump over the MA stuff, go straight into the PhD, and prove that Homer was the catalyst that brought so many other artists here. I will prove that. I don't know where I'll start, but it's just one of these.
You can always start with Buffalo Exposition. I think that's a good starting place.
It's a fun fantasy. I'll keep that going. Anyway, so tourism did change our way of life. Now, I think the thing that we must keep in mind too, when visitors came here, I've always believed, by the way, that artists lead the way. So artists find, an area that they like, then the gentry come in, and some of the gentry turn out to be the rich gentry, and that changes the whole paradigm for an artist's experience. So by the 30s, the Astors and the Vanderbilts and the Webbs and whoever else was, wealthy and rich was moving into Bermuda. The Queen of Bermuda was plying the waters regularly until World War II. I mean, Bermuda was on a roll. We couldn't keep up with the number of hotels that were being built. So the sort of the bed and breakfast style of hotel was quickly disappearing to make way for the Princess Hotel. And oh, by the way, the Princess Hotel is named after Princess Louise, or in her honor, not after her because it doesn't have Louise in it, but in her honor of her visit to Bermuda. That's where its name comes from. So there's all sorts of derivatives and recognitions of our tourist trade.
But the interesting thing is that after the 20s and the early 30s, there was a dearth of artists that came down here with tourism. I mean, we know of a few, but it wasn't this huge influx that we had in the beginning of the 20th century. And it probably has something to do with the war. It had something to do with depression. It was more of a rich people's playground than it was an artist playground. And I have a theory that it was just, it outpriced itself for a lot of artists who just couldn't afford it anymore. In the 20s, you had the whole Lyme school that were able to come down here and buy houses and stay here for the winter and stay with their families and whatever. When you started getting these wealthy Americans coming down here, the prices started to skyrocket, and people turned in another direction. But the interesting thing about the tourist, the whole tourist feeling then was after the war, so many of our tourist, mementos came from Germany because they were trying to build up their economy. So the interesting thing is, from that time, we have beautiful photographs of Bermuda houses and cottages, but they have red roofs or purple roofs or green roofs or whatever color the German who was manufacturing this wished to have. So it kind of made a fantasy of the whole Bermuda experience, which was almost surreal. And, the reality of what was really there and the reality of what people were taking home with them were two completely different things. So I really think that kind of affected tourism as well. And then of course, after that, you got a resurgence of people coming to Bermuda and, sort of the gold.
To Elise's point, we even have a German beer stein that has the mountains in the background. It says Bermuda underneath.
Yeah. I mean, it was.
I love it.
Really
you
weird.
gotta love it.
Yeah. So, I mean, tourism was whatever it was wanted to be to whoever was promoting it at the time. But the thing that I love is the fact that you have a consistent quality, high quality of artists that came here, and not just artists. As Tom said, you had Mark Twain, who was probably the biggest ambassador we had. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have half the tourist industry that we had, in the early 1900s. I mean, it just, he just adored it and wrote about it all the time, and people wanted to come down here. And like I said, Bermuda was exotic. The people were wonderful. Mark Twain talked about how wonderful the people were. Not everybody everybody loved Bermuda. Not every tour artist loved Bermuda, but the majority did, and the majority took their paintings away, which is why we at Masterworks have been so lucky in that so many of them brought their paintings back home with them to the States. So they were preserved from all the bugs and mold and cockroaches and weevils and all the things that affected so many pieces of artwork that stayed on the island. So we have these wonderful paintings that have been, stored in really dry attics or homes for years. And I think that's the beauty of what how we've been able to repatriate things that are in such good condition.
I think that one of the things that we must keep in mind too is, unlike other industries, tourism created the perfect trickle-down economy. Not everybody benefited, and yes, a handful of people made a hell of a lot of money here locally. But it did give pretty much full employment for those who were physically able to work, because tourism is a physical employment. You've got to make beds, cook meals, do horse, farriers, whatever it may be. It is a physical occupation. I think that the interesting thing too is that as a result of tourism, many Bermudians themselves started to travel, because for the first 300 years we were, landlocked or sea-locked, as the case may be, because there was no visitation. Long before, that's right, before COVID-19, Bermudians were, just looking and dealing with themselves. So tourism opened up, another, avenue for us, not just the flux in, but the flux out, and the ability to travel. So it opened up New York particularly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And Elise, I just want to circle back to something you said a couple minutes ago around Winslow Homer showing his pieces and saying, these watercolors that I created in Bermuda were the best I've ever created.
Best work I've ever.
And
Yeah.
are there other artists that you can think of who visited Bermuda whose style was significantly changed or advanced because of their visit to
Yeah, I think I personally think that Charles Demuth and Marston Hartley Bermuda had a huge impact on them. Not so much in the format of their work, but the colors and the palettes that they saw in Bermudian architecture, the peeling paints, the organic looks. If you look at Hartley's work, for instance, or Demuth from 1916 to after they came to Bermuda, it really softened. Before it was the red barn, and even when they went back to New York or Provincetown in 1918, their colors had definitely softened. Demuth had moved from doing very biomorphic paintings of flowers and whatever. When he was here, he was really intrigued by the Bermudian architecture, which probably made his mark as a great precisionist all the more important. And they're probably the most academic artists, save Homer, that we have in our collection, but that was a case where Bermuda really did make a difference. And Ambrose Webster, he, as I said, he realized that the shadows were purple, and he carried that tradition on even after he left here. Although he kept coming to Bermuda until, I think, what was it, Tom, 1932?
28.
28, yeah.
Died in 35.
So he was coming to Bermuda from at least 1912 until 1928. And that had a huge, I think the atmosphere of Bermuda has a huge effect on artists one way or the other, because it's in the middle of the Atlantic. There's no smog. It's pristine. There's just something about the quality of the air and the light that artists find challenging, but once they capture it, they find it intriguing. And it was very similar to Provincetown, because
I think we're getting sort of art specific here, which I understand, as opposed to a broader subject of tourism and its birth. And in a way, it's sort of a two-pronged thing. There are the artists, that's one prong, and then there's the commerce behind it. I've often reflected on my father, who passed away many years ago now. But near his death, I asked him about tourism or artists and tourism in the 30s, and he simply said, well, prior to World War II, Bermuda was a very poor island, and as a result, people came here and they were unfettered by a Bermudian attention. We Bermudians were having to go about their daily lives. So, while, those artists had their easels in the middle of the road or the street or whatever it is, they were working and walking around the island completely free of any sort of recognition or people stopping them and saying, "Hey, buddy, what are you doing?" That too has changed.
No, but I do understand that. But the question was what artists were affected to change their styles in Bermuda, which really doesn't. Yeah, I mean, that was the question.
I get that. I just, the topic is about tourism. And and as I say, it's a big one because we'll never get that industry back the way it was. And so what does one do? Is really the question that we have post COVID-19. How can we do better? And how can we build an industry that is once again its salubrious self? That's what we need to sort of focus in on.
Well, I also believe that artists were sort of still given sort of a short shrift on the island in Bermuda. And I'm not making any disparaging remarks, but I do think that if more artists were valued and their artwork was sent overseas, so people, I mean, I know all of us have been, I've been in weird towns in France and Italy, and there are pictures of Bermuda, and it entices people. If we had more artists that came down here, I think it would do a whole lot for the tourist industry that nobody's paid a lot of attention to. I mean, we have a great plein air festival, which brings, I think it's every other year, which is really popular, but I think we could be doing more of this kind of thing if we wanted. I mean, it's a whole other aspect of tourism that we could all get together and explore and work on. I mean, it's not rocket science, really. It's just it's just enticing people to come down here specifically to paint and bring their paintings back home with them and, spread the word.
Well,
that's what tourism's all about.
It's a little bit like where we started philosophically back in 1987. Who says that heritage is a once a month thing? So who says that a plein air festival should be every other year? It should be every day of our lives that there's a plein air festival going on. So in other words, just a celebration of life. And the colors of Bermuda are here 365 days of the year, and so we should be able to open this up with that kind of thing in mind. So Risa, you have a challenge in front of you. You've got some years ahead of you to make that kind of happen.
I agree. And I think, just listening to both of you, I completely agree. Bermuda has such a rich history, such a vibrant culture, so many influences from all over the world that are here in this mosaic culture that we have, right? And so I think we need to celebrate that more. We need to share it more with individuals. We need others to understand the value of the creatives on island, the value of the artistic community here. So I agree. I think that's definitely a focus as we move ahead.
I'd like to touch on the work that's right behind your head, as a matter of fact. That is done by an Italian artist. And on first looking at it, you think, oh, it's a watercolor. Then you realize it's a mixed media, that she has collaged paper on top of paper and used watercolor as the medium. It's very, very cool. So in other words, it's another interpretation. It's not just about, Bermuda's a pretty little place for the Sunday school watercolor artist. No. It's much, 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 much more than that. And that work, by the way, came to us at the beginning of this year, which is an incredible gift and a wonderful dynamic to the addition of the lexicon that we have within the collection. So that's too why we need to do more of these festivals, because other people have a whole layering of interpretations that there's no end of. Bermuda is simply a matrix upon which we should be using much more often.
But Bermuda is also a healing, gentle, loving place, and I think that a lot of people came down here in the beginning because it was thought of as a place. If you were ill, you had whatever people were getting sick with in the late 1800s. Bermuda was thought of as a place that was a cure for it. And we could go back to maybe not being a physical cure, but I think Bermuda, using our paintings could be used as a healing cure for all the bad feelings that we have in the world. I mean, people come to Bermuda, don't necessarily understand it, but when they come here, they feel a sense of peace and gentility, and it's a pace that they understand. And I think that could help our tourism if people understood it a little bit more. We're not looking for the flashy nightlife because we don't have it. What we do have is beautiful beaches and, you know, beautiful air and lovely people.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, as we said, you know, there's so much work to do here, coming out of this first half of 2020 with COVID. We're in this space where we don't know what our tourism industry is going to look like for the next several months, but hopefully by 2021 we're back, and really it's just focusing within that time frame on how can we position ourselves to outsiders to bring them to Bermuda and understand the value of our culture, the value of our people, and as I said before, the value of our artistic communities. So Elise and Tom, thank you so much. This is all we have time for today.
That's too bad, because I was going to bring up something. I was going to bring up something about color photography, because we were on the cutting edge of that too.
All right.
Of tourism.
Next week, Tom, next week.
We'll have to do that next
First. Yeah.
Okay. So.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. And
thank you very much.
yeah, we'll see you next week.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, see you next
Bye.
week.
Bye.